But is there evidence of thermite in the World Trade Center dust? Dr. Jones received no less than 4 separate samples of World Trade Center dust, some of it from Jeanette McKinley's apartment across the street, where the windows blew in and filled her apartment with dust. Another sample was found like 10 minutes later on the Brooklyn Bridge. Well, he takes this and he puts a magnet over it, and he finds that there are small particles that come up to the magnet. Some of them are angular, some of them are round. They look like this. In fact, he calculates by the weight of the amount of these spheres that he finds in the dust that there must have been about 10 tons for all of the dust that was available. They're about 1/16 of an inch in diameter, the largest ones, and most of them, though, are smaller than a human hair. What could produce such an incredible array of microspheres? Well, if you had thousands of cutter charges going off in the columns and beams throughout the building, and they were under this incredible pressure, what you'd see is something like this. Tens of thousands or millions of tiny droplets. What's the shape of those droplets? When a liquid is dispersed like this, its surface tension forms itself into almost a perfect sphere. In the case of molten iron, those droplets cool and they fall along with the dust everywhere. Well, Dr. Jones concludes that given the mix of trace metals present in these high concentrations in the dust, such as zinc, copper, manganese, and the formation of iron-rich aluminum spheres, it's clear that significant aluminothermic reactions occur, and he can reverse engineer this and suggest to us that there must have been in the thermite mix powders of aluminum, iron oxide, copper oxide, zinc nitrate, and potassium permanganate. Well, would there possibly be any unignited thermite pieces in the World Trade Center dust? Indeed, he finds it. It also comes up to the magnet from his dust samples. Many chips. This one, 1/16 of an inch long, red on one side, gray on the other. The red side is composed of tiny iron oxide particles and aluminum. The Lawrence Livermore Lab came out with papers only a year or two ago about this stuff. The particles being so small allow for almost instantaneous ignition between the two chemicals, the aluminum and the iron oxide, producing very explosive results. He continues his study and finds additional chips that are partially ignited, with spheres embedded in them, indicating that the source of the spheres is, for all intents and purposes, identified very clearly. With Dr. Jones and his small team of scientists, through EDS, XRF, and WDS, identifies the components of these spheres and chips, predominantly iron, along with aluminum, oxygen, silicon, 1,3-diphenylpropane. The results, coupled with the visual evidence, he says, at the scene, such as the flowing hot liquid metal, providing compelling evidence that thermite reaction compounds were deliberately placed in both World Trade Center towers and Building 7. These results are documented in a peer-reviewed journal. Now, all of this is direct evidence of explosive destruction in Building 7. We'll jump back to only Building 7 now. Now, none of these characteristics can be explained by fire, let alone all of them. Let's listen to what FEMA did conclude, because it is interesting. Evidence of a severe high-temperature corrosion attack on the steel, including rapid oxidation, sulfidation, and subsequent intergranular melting. Very interesting. Remember, office fires don't melt steel. What melted this steel? Sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. Here is the intergranular melting documented for all of us. Thank you. Capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like this former wide flange column from the structural steel in Building 7. Now, they document this very carefully in their Appendix C. The specifics of the fires in World Trade Center 7 and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown at this time. What? Unknown? The best hypothesis, fire plus random damage, and then complete collapse, has only a low probability of occurrence. How about expert corroboration? How about Danny Jawenko, 27-year controlled demolitions expert? It starts from below. They've simply blown away the columns. It's controlled demolition. A team of experts did this. It's professional work, without a doubt. Building 7, do we have any foreknowledge of its destruction? Listen to these construction workers walking away from Building 7 and this police officer caught on CNN camera.
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down.
Building is about to blow up. Move it back.
All right, guys.
We are walking back. There's a building about to blow up. On flame. Debris coming down.
And how about Kevin McPadden? What did he say?
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
Countdown? Does that imply foreknowledge? Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? Unlikely. In fact, the BBC announces the collapse 20 minutes before it happened. It's true. Jane Stanley is here announcing it. She says the 47-story Solomon Brothers building close to the World Trade Center has also collapsed. And there it is standing behind her. The BBC apologizes for this grievous error, citing the confusing events of the day. But does that make them psychic? Unlikely. I believe we've shown that Building 7 matches all of the features of controlled demolition in the classic sense. Is it likely that Al-Qaeda could have had access to this building, which had to have been one of the most secure outside the Pentagon? If they didn't, then who did? The evidence is even more clear in the case of the Twin Towers. So let's take a look, starting with the sudden onset. And what is the evidence for this, and how is it produced? Produced by these sounds and flashes from the explosion. 118 of these firefighters witnessed sounds and flashes of explosions. Somewhere around the middle of the World Trade Center, there was this orange and red flash coming out. Initially just one flash, then it just kept popping all the way around the building. The building had started to explode. It's like on television, they blow up these buildings. Seemed like it was going all the way around, like a belt, all these explosions. Pop, pop, pop. That's when I heard the building coming down. Saw a brief number of light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. I saw low-level flashes. We actually heard the pops. You know, you heard the pops of the building. It was blowing out on all 4 sides. What did these guys experience?
We started running floor by floor. It started popping out.
It was like it was if they had detonated.
Detonated.
If they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down.
How about the news reporters? What do they say? They tend to tell the truth on the first day, and then we don't hear that truth again. What happens to it?
Anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
I heard a second explosion and another rumble.
A huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
And all of a sudden, it was this big explosion.
There was another big explosion. An hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse?
To me, it sounded like an explosion,
but it was a huge explosion.
Chief Albert Turry said that there was another explosion which took place, and then an hour after there was another explosion in one of the towers here. So according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
It just went ba-boom, it was like a bomb went off, and another explosion came right from it, just everyone flying.
Like, it sounded like gunfire, you know, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions, 3 thuds.
There was a heavy-duty explosion.
Again, none of these explosions are a part of the official story. Now, compare these explosions to a known explosion on the left here. Outward arching streamers, pyroclastic volumes of dust, symmetrical display like a mushroom. Does it look like a gravitational collapse to you? Let's look at the North Tower now. What I want to point out to you is that you're going to see some explosions up at the top of the building, curiously enough. And what's going to happen is this entire section is going to telescope such that half of it, its upper half, is destroyed before there's any movement from the jet plane impacts down. Let's take a look. Here's the first evidence of explosion, and then over here, and then the collapsing. Of course, the violent clouds which are emerging even prior to the collapse. We're going to take a close-up look after this second look. A new fuel source, which very well might be jet fuel that wasn't burned, it's getting new oxygen. Let's take a look now closer up. Right away, we're seeing clouds forming up here. Well, wait, the collapse is supposed to be just down here. But we have asymmetrical damage to this building, right? The plane went in one side, and yet this complete symmetrical collapse, we'll use in quotes from now on, and let's keep going.
Unexpected to
And one
many
more
of us
time.
in terms of how swiftly
Belts, just like the firemen saw, all the way around the building.
they came down.
The antenna falls
Many of
first,
us in terms of
before
how
anything
swiftly it
else falls, indicating core column damage first. Now take a look at the same tower from the bottom, noting the violence underneath the mushroom cloud. The collapse is supposed to be occurring way up here, but down below, as you'll see in this second run, incredible quantities of squibs, explosions bursting out. And on the third time, I'd like to direct your attention to this racing series of explosions down the right side in the corner of this building. About 40 stories below the collapsing building. It gets painfully obvious after a while, doesn't it? Do we have a straight down symmetrical progression of collapse outside the footprint? We had a 207-foot wide building. FEMA tells us, and you can see in this document, that we have a 1,200-foot debris field, equidistant around each tower. Asymmetrical damage, symmetrical distribution, all through the site, in fact, and beyond. Do we have squibs, or these mistimed explosions? Some believe that these might be appropriately timed explosions. Whatever.
In all the videos of the collapses, explosions can be seen bursting from the building 20 to 30 stories below the demolition wave. Here, 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 and here.
Now, NIST tells us that these are puffs of air being produced by the collapsing building pushing air down the hoistway like a piston. It's got to come out somewhere, right? Well, first of all, these are not puffs of air. They're pulverized building materials. And they occur at 160 to 200 feet, some of them, per second. These velocities are propelled by explosives. 20, 40, and 60 stories below. How can the piston be producing all of that? These highly focalized, pinpoint accurate, geometrically precise, violent ejections. Do we have a near free fall pace through the path of greatest resistance?
The Twin Towers came down in nearly free fall speed.
What does this mean? That the columns had to have been removed virtually simultaneously on each floor, synchronistically timed, so the building had virtually no resistance on the way down.